Hello everyone, my name is Charlie Ely and this is the second in a series of short video lectures created for your BA Contemporary Dance Performance in Context module. These videos are designed as introductions to theories about dance that you can then apply to the work of a particular choreographer or a particular dance form or to your own work. I hope you'll find them helpful. This video focuses on the concepts of colonisation, post-colonialism, and looks at the work of a few early post-colonial dance practitioners. In modern Britain, we do talk about empire and colonisation quite a bit. That's not to say we always talk about them in the most honest or considerate way, but they're terms that we're all becoming familiar with. This year, of course, as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, the statue of imperial slave trader Edward Colston was taken down in Bristol, and we're having more conversations about the still ongoing effects of British colonialism. But what exactly do these terms mean? A helpful way to separate them is to think about empire and imperialism as the idea or plan to exert control over other people and places, and to think of colonies and colonisation as the practice, the practical application of that idea. Imperialism comes from the Latin imperium, to command, and colonialism comes from the Latin colonus, farmer. This indicates how the latter concept is involved with the idea of land and of moving people to settle in new territories. We can trace colonialism all the way back to ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. Modern colonialism dates back to the 16th century and European advances in shipbuilding and related technologies that allowed people to start reaching much further destinations. European countries who claimed overseas land included Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, Germany and Russia, whilst the Ottoman Empire, which started in present-day Turkey, occupied much of North Africa and the Middle East for centuries. One of the main ideas was to improve trade, to find quicker, simpler ways to get goods back home. But this soon mushroomed into a desire to control those products and natural resources and the related subjugation of local populations. The Europeans built on existing systems of slavery and in particular shipped tens of millions of enslaved Africans over to the Americas. By the end of the 19th century, Britain and France had by far the largest colonial empires, and thusly they've arguably had the biggest impact on 20th and 21st century dance worldwide, including the artists who I'm going to talk about. Their economic gains allowed them to build grand theatres and opera houses, and to bring their exotic dancers from the colonies back to perform in them. In 1931, French theatre maker Antonin Artaud saw Balinese dancers perform in Paris, and this famously had a really huge impact on his work. At the same time, both the French and the British tried to suppress indigenous performing arts in colonies. During the 1950s and 60s, we saw the end of formal colonisation across much of the globe. Sometimes there was a peaceful transfer of power, but usually it was as a result of increasingly effective protests, uprisings, and political movements. Post-colonialism is firstly a marker of time to describe things that have happened after colonisation. But it is also used to describe a variety of critical theories that help us to explore and understand the legacy of colonialism in both the former colonial powers, the newly independent nations themselves, and for their diaspora populations. Some post-colonialist thinkers argue that this legacy is so pervasive that it should be included in all of our considerations of contemporary culture. Frantz Fanon is a particularly important writer as he inspired a lot of early post-colonial intellectuals and artists. He was born in the West Indies, but he lived most of his adult life in France and Algeria. His 1961 book, The Wretched of the Earth, is first a rallying cry to colonised peoples to fight for their independence and to place culture at the heart of their new nations. He explains how cultural estrangement, the attempt to distance colonised peoples from their indigenous cultures, was a key part in maintaining control over those populations. Perhaps you might consider now what you see as major parts of your own national or ethnic culture, and what you might miss the most if you were denied the chance to engage with it. Many politicians and leaders of newly independent nations took up Fanon's ideas and spoke of the desire for a cultural renaissance. Julius Nyerere's inauguration speech as the first president of Tanganyika included the following: "Many of us have learnt to dance the rumba, to cha-cha-cha, to rock and roll, and to twist, to even learn the waltz and the foxtrot. But how many of us can dance, or have even heard of, the gombe sugu, the mangala, the kombe, or the lele mama?" Nyerere's wish for Tanzanians to revive their old performance forms was shared by many across post-colonial nations. But of course we know that the idea of fixed traditional dance is an invention, and the dance choreographies have always been changing. Fanon's view is that pre-colonial culture can help heal the wounds of colonialism, and yet there's a limit to the usefulness of turning to the past. He says, national culture is not a folklore. In other words, that art should focus on the present. Senegal's first president, Léopold Senghor, was also a poet and part of the negritude movement that aimed to foster a positive sense of black identity and the idea that black is beautiful. Negritude was also linked to the idea of pan-Africanism, of strengthening bonds and communication between peoples of African descent. Senghor's passion for the arts led to Senegal hosting the first World Festival of Negro Arts in 1966. 45 countries participated, and there were performances from the Alvin Ailey Company, jazz musician and composer Duke Ellington, writer Langston Hughes, playwright Wole Soyinka, and Catherine Dunham working with the Senegal National Ballet. Fanon suggested that negritude and pan-Africanism are useful philosophies. They can help empower, uplift and connect people, but there are limits to their usefulness because they tend to lump all black culture together, denying all the rich diversity. We might wonder now about the celebrity of these African American performers at such a festival, as perpetuating this idea that the West was still superior. At the 66 festival, there were performances by the national dance troupes of over a dozen African nations. Finding a sense of unity between myriad ethnic groups speaking different languages within one nation was also very important, and dance was considered the perfect means of embodying it. Unfortunately, the dancers of such companies were often taken advantage of. They were paid little, and their work was often used as a smokescreen to hide problems within the country, particularly of unity and equality. Fanon said every culture is first and foremost national. That's a point on which I don't agree with Fanon. I think it's very of its time, and in my opinion, in our multicultural, cosmopolitan world, culture has become so hybridised that it can't be bound to the idea of nation. Over in the Caribbean, the National Dance Theatre of Jamaica was founded in 1962, the year of its independence from Britain. In Jamaica, there are few ethnically indigenous peoples and little surviving pre-colonial culture. 92% of the population are of African or partially African descent, so their culture harks back to pre-colonial Africa, but in a very different way to those on the African continent. Many Jamaicans cannot trace their origins to a particular ethnic group, region or country. The very hybridised society and culture of the island is a key reason why from the outset the company combined existing Caribbean dance dramas and rituals with contemporary modern dance and ballet. Along with other dancers across the Caribbean, its founders Rex Nettleford and Eddie Thomas were influenced by Catherine Dunham's research into folk forms. Nettleford conducted his own research and found that many dances had developed from those of enslaved people working on plantations. He also found dances inspired by the landscape of Jamaica and in particular by its seas. He also took a research trip to West Africa in 1962, and Thomas's previous role as a member of the Martha Graham Dance Company played a vital part in the modern dance aspect of their choreographies. Their 1968 piece, The King Must Die, begins with dancers in typical modern dance clothes, performing recognisably Graham-esque steps. The piece is seemingly non-representational and non-culturally specific. It also features music from the American jazz drummer Art Blakey with the Afro Drum Ensemble. Yet, despite its appearance, Sorgel states that Caribbean dance cannot be separated from its religious roots, since much of the company's distinct modern dance style derives directly from African Caribbean religions and their embodiment of ancestral spirits in dance performance. In contrast to the overall abstract aesthetic of that piece, 1971's Camina is based on a ritual from eastern Jamaica, from Jamaicans of Congolese descent. In Sorgel's words, it extracts the essential movement and rhythmic vocabulary of that folk tradition in order to translate its formal characteristics and iconicity into dance theatre. There is a clear narrative following the stages of the ritual, which culminate in the crowning of a king and queen. The costumes are that of colourful everyday local dress, and there is a backdrop with a landscape, again contrasting hugely with The King Must Die. There are few moves that would look at home in an American or European modern dance piece. The dancers' backs remain erect and their steps are flat-footed. So, in the company's work, we see both the pride in national cultural heritage and also the desire to represent the face of contemporary Jamaica. Regarding the Western forms, Sorgel argues that Jamaican dance theatre performs subversively from within modern dance, rather than merely providing an adaptation of it. In these ways, it has been fantastically effective in decolonising Jamaican culture. Since the late 1980s, the company has engaged in an exchange and training programme with the National Modern Dance Company of Cuba, which is a former colony of first Spain and then the USA, further creolising their dance aesthetic. The company continues to thrive and tour the world in the 21st century. Back in Senegal, Senegal's government continued to support the arts. Their strong ties to former colonial power France played a big part in this too. Senegalese choreographer Germaine Acogny left home to study for a diploma in physical education in France. As the only African student at that school, she was deeply aware of the institutional preference for particular bodies and dance forms. In her own words, "Mademoiselle Lamotte remarked to me that my feet were flat. It was plain to me that I had to work on my feet and imitate the others. I soon realised that I was incapable of imitating, and therefore had to invent moves to correspond to my nature." She returned to Senegal in 1965 and became a dance teacher. She also met Catherine Dunham and became similarly interested in researching African dance. Her first choreography was a solo with Black womanhood as its theme, inspired by a Senghor poem. It was a great success and brought her to Senghor's attention, and in 1977 she became the director of a new government-funded professional dance school, Mudra Africa. They wanted to generate a new kind of Black African dance that could be understood and appreciated by people of all cultures. Over the next 5 years, she developed her own technique, partly through teaching it to students. Very similar to what we've seen with the National Dance Theatre of Jamaica, her new technique combined Senegalese cultural dances with modern dance and ballet. Of primary importance to her technique is the spine, or what Acogny calls la serpent du vie, the snake of life. Spinal undulations, contractions, and release. Another key feature of her classes is the march. She has students walk continuously between specific moves, maintaining a fluidity in the torso. Mudra Afrique closed after 6 years due to a lack of funding. In 1998, Acogny opened her own successor to this, École de Sable, which remains the most important school for dance in Africa. It continues to promote a pan-African ethos, primarily taking students from across the continent, although some non-African international students have also attended. Of nearly 50 choreographers in Eastern Africa who I'm in touch with or aware of, 15 trained at École de Sable. That's nearly a third. and some trained to teach the technique themselves. Acogny has been a phenomenal role model. Many of her former students still call her Mama Germaine, and I've had nothing but praise of the training there. However, we might now question how the vast success of the Acogny technique might be starting to dwarf other African attempts at dance innovation. In recent years, her work has become more avant-garde, incorporating both theatre and multimedia, as with 2016, Somewhere in the Beginning. Acogny and her team have also forged a new relationship with the dance theatre Wuppertal. In February this year, 38 African dancers were chosen to perform Bausch's Rite of Spring. Whilst COVID-19 has meant the postponement of live performances, an atmospheric rehearsal on the beach by École de Sable was filmed, and it is well worth a watch. One of the most impactful legacies of British and French colonialism, particularly on the African continent, is that of language. Sharing a language with people from different countries is bound to forge bonds between you. And in the dance world today, we still see those from France and Francophone countries interact and collaborate much more between themselves than they do with Anglophone countries, and vice versa. To finish, I hope that this video has shown you that thinking about both imperialism and post-colonialism are important parts of dance studies today. And I hope that I've shown how vital the work of a few early post-colonial pioneers has been in influencing the contemporary dance landscape.